Holmes? You all right on that?
In 1984, British television gave the world what many still consider the most perfect Sherlock Holmes ever filmed. He was brilliant without becoming cozy, emotional without being sentimental, and eccentric without ever sliding into easy parody. A Holmes who could be elegant one second and almost frightening the next. A Holmes who made the room feel colder when he entered it. A Holmes who seemed less like a fictional detective and more like a brilliant, wounded, impossible man accidentally caught on camera. That Holmes was Jeremy Brett, and for millions of viewers he didn't simply play the detective, he became Sherlock Holmes. The trouble was, Jeremy Brett seemed to know it too. And by the end, the role that made him immortal had become something darker, a prison, an obsession, and perhaps even an enemy. Today we talk about the strange and tragic case of Jeremy Brett, the actor who gave us the truest Sherlock Holmes and may have paid for it more than anyone else. If this kind of story is your thing, the subtle line between art and obsession, my mystery novel, Brood Scandal in Art Brood, is in the description.
Would you care to try it?
Here we see a lively, witty Jeremy Brett, not yet the haunted figure of the later years. A distinguished British classical actor, he had quite a career before becoming the truest Sherlock. He starred as Freddie Ainsford Hale in the film My Fair Lady and played D'Artagnan in The Three Musketeers, Nikolai Rostov in War and Peace, and Max de Winter in iconic Rebecca.
In a sense, Sherlock has restored your career to full bloom.
Oh, I don't think it's restored. I think it's made it, actually.
Made it, yeah.
I was doing quite nicely before, but this is done maybe, as I say, into a twinkling.
Amusingly, he was also engaged as Dr. Watson on stage opposite Charlton Heston as Holmes in the 1980 Los Angeles production of The Crucifer of Blood. This coincidence made him one of only a small number of professional actors to play both Holmes and Watson in their careers. Brett would go on to play the detective for a decade, from 1984 to 1994, across 41 episodes. Despite a full career on stage and screen, it was this role that ultimately defined him. That is not unusual. What is unusual is how completely it seemed to absorb him.
And I found him an enormous strain to play. He is a very dark, private man. And you have to really drain yourself out, because I'm much too ebullient for the part. You have to be very bloodless. And I found that a great strain.
When Brett accepted the offer of Granada Television, he set the bar as high as possible. He wanted to be the best Sherlock Holmes the world had ever seen. Well, indeed, Brett set out to build the most complete portrayal possible, and he did so with near-obsessive precision. Like David Suchet, he treated the text of Arthur Conan Doyle as a blueprint, compiling his famous almost 80 pages Baker Street file and refining every detail of Holmes' behavior.
Mr. Holmes, but what do you know of this business?
A good deal.
He studied the nuances during lunch breaks, on weekends, on his holidays. The actor was especially attentive to discrepancies between the script he had been given and Doyle's original stories.
Then I discovered, having read the stories, that certain quirks about him that hadn't been touched on. All my clothes, for example, are from the Sidney Paget drawings. So I just copied the drawings that accompanied the magazine.
Having mastered Holmes' day-to-day habits, Brett went even further. He gave Holmes an inner life, a lonely, emotionally deprived figure whose brilliance masked something missing. That idea shaped everything: the sudden moods, the visible tension, the inability to fully conceal emotion. The result was remarkable: a Holmes who felt more real than any before him. Brilliant, difficult, and deeply unsettling in his contradictions. he masterfully portrayed a man capable of deep kindness and sudden cruelty, intense focus, and complete withdrawal. Watching Brett, you understand why Watson is both devoted to him and occasionally exhausted by him. As I read in some comment, well, this level of immersion comes with a cost.
I speak not only as your friend, but as a medical man. How can you risk such damage to the great powers with which you have been endowed?
I cannot tell you how it clarifies and stimulates the mind.
Yes, and destroys it in time.
Brett understood the risk. Like many serious actors, he feared typecasting. But unlike Basil Rathbone, whose struggle with Holmes was largely professional, Brett's was far more personal. He was not simply concerned with being remembered as Holmes. He was concerned with what it would take to become him.
I find him the hardest person to get into and explore and create from inside myself, because he's the most complex character I've ever played, and I have played Macbeth and I have played Hamlet, and this is the most private creature, isolated creature, and a genius to boot. They're very difficult to actually find within oneself if one's just a mere human being.
He approached the role not as television, but as something to be fully inhabited, and for a time it worked almost too well. Just like William Gillett before him and Rathbone in the mid-20th century, Brett became the Holmes of his generation. So, what exactly went wrong?
Explain, Mr. Cubitt, and come to the point.
Unfortunately, Jeremy Brett had multiple severe health issues throughout his life. While he was a kid, he developed progressive heart failure as a sad result of childhood rheumatic fever which damaged his heart valves. His lifelong heavy smoking, like 3 packs a day, didn't support his well-being either.
Mr. Holmes, you are the very worst tenant in London.
In addition, he was later diagnosed with bipolar disorder. He talked about it openly and was one of the first celebrities to share a major illness in order to help those who suffer.
Watson, what is the medical term for obsession?
Unfortunately, the medications he was then prescribed didn't go well with his cardiac condition. They caused fluid retention, which made him look puffy and put a strain on his heart. In the last episodes, he was using oxygen when he was not on camera. Moreover, their toxicity possibly led to the lithium poisoning of his body. And of course, this becomes part of the story, but not in the simple way people sometimes frame it. It wasn't that playing Sherlock Holmes somehow caused it. That's not what happened. But the role itself demanded something very intense, total concentration, emotional extremes, and living inside the mind that doesn't really function like most people do. And that kind of immersion, it's not harmless.
I crave mental exaltation. That is why I've chosen my own profession, or rather, created it. For I am the only one in the world.
Because Holmes himself is built on extremes. He needs stimulation to function, and without it, he almost collapses. He swings between bursts of energy and complete withdrawal. He's brilliant, yes, but he's not stable in any ordinary sense. And Brett understood that instinctively.
My mind rebels at stagnation. Give me problems. Give me work.
He recognized something in Holmes, and maybe that's exactly why the role started to get under his skin. The actor mentioned how he thought there was too much of his own real-life personality in the character, the manic energy, the outbursts of emotion, even if he felt that wasn't true to Doyle's canon.
I see him as the elusive Pimpernel still, just in front of me. I can't catch him.
Can't catch him.
I think that's why I find it so fascinating to play, because I can't reach him. It is the most fascinating part I've ever played.
People who worked with Brett later said that Holmes didn't always stay on set. Even after filming, something of the character seemed to linger. It affected his mood, the way he carried himself. At some point, Brett even stopped saying the name Sherlock Holmes altogether. He would just call him you-know-who, as even saying it out loud had become too much. There are also stories that he began dreaming about Holmes, and the dreams turned into nightmares.
I feel, you see, that I must lay to rest the ghost which has haunted me for some time.
The actor once confessed that for him, the stories were about a great friendship, that Holmes would have probably died young without Watson to ground him. Off-screen, Jeremy Brett and Edward Hardwicke too shared a genuine friendship built on respect. Hardwicke often described Brett as a man of extraordinary passion, and despite Brett's own struggles, where even the strongest relationships were tested, Hardwicke stood by him through it all.
This business we're in, this profession we're in, it's hard enough to survive, let alone have a success. So when one has a success, although it's not a very palatable word in this country, they're much more fond of it in the States, I'm enjoying every giddy moment of it. I'm loving having people outside the stage door. I'm loving being with my friend Edward because we're best friends off as well as on. We're having a ball.
Alas, the real life wasn't always kind to Brett. His wife, American TV producer John Wilson, died of cancer during the early years of the series, and that loss completely shook him and kicked off massive manic episode that left him in hospital after hacking off his own hair. This was grief, and it was real and devastating. And from that point on, the role existed alongside a man dealing with the loss, illness, and growing physical strain.
Nevertheless, there is an element of truth in what you say.
So, it's important to get this right. Sherlock Holmes didn't create Jeremy Brett's suffering, but the role didn't protect him from it either. If anything, it kept demanding more from him, exactly at the moment when he had less to give, well, at least physically. And somewhere along the way, the role stopped being a role. What makes this story unsettling is that you don't have to be told it. You can see it yourself. If you watch the series from the beginning, the difference is striking. Early on, Jeremy Brett is sharp, almost weightless, with that quick, bird-like precision. Everything about him feels fast, controlled, slightly ahead of the room. His Sherlock Holmes moves like a mind that never quite rests.
You don't mind breaking the law?
Not in the least.
Not running the chance of arrest?
Not in a good cause.
Oh, the cause is excellent.
Well, then I am your man.
Splendid.
But as the years go, that rhythm begins to change. The movements slow down, the face fills out, the energy becomes uneven, sometimes still electric, sometimes visibly strained. And this isn't a reinterpretation of the character. This is body given way. Heart problems, medications, exhaustion, all of it starts to show where the script acknowledges it or not.
She's lying, Watson. She's lying through her teeth.
And here is the strange part. The performance doesn't weaken, it shifts. The later Holmes is no longer invincible. He feels more exposed, more fragile, almost as if the work itself is keeping him upright. The cases aren't just intellectual exercises anymore. They begin to look like something he needs in order to function. And that's where watching the series becomes uncomfortable, because at a certain point you stop watching a character develop and start watching a man hold himself together. You can feel it most clearly in The Dying Detective. On paper, it's a clever performance, Holmes pretending to be ill to deceive an enemy. But here, it doesn't play as a trick. It lands differently, because you're watching someone who is already unwell, performing illness on top of that. So the scene splits in two. Holmes acting, Brett is enduring. and the camera records both at the same time. What makes it even more harder to process is that he keeps going on. By all accounts, he insisted on it. "The show must go on, darlings," he said on set. Typical professionalism by him. However difficult it became, he carried on. That instinct drilled into actors from the beginning. You don't stop, you don't break, you finish the performance. Which sounds admirable until you realize what it actually means. Because at some point, continuing stops being a choice.
Holmes!
What's wrong?
So, did Sherlock Holmes destroy Jeremy Brett? Looks so, albeit not directly. He was already dealing with illness, with grief, with physical decline. Those things were real, and they would have been there with or without the role. Reducing his life to "Holmes destroyed him" is too simple and frankly not true. But saying Holmes had nothing to do with it doesn't hold either, because the way Brett chose to play the role left no distance. Everything Holmes required, intensity, control, emotional exposure, he gave completely. And that's exactly what made the performance so powerful. There's no safety in it, no sense that the actor is holding something back. It feels open, lived in, almost unprotected. For sure, a performance like that doesn't just exist on screen. It has to be sustained day after day, year after year. And in Brett's case, it ran alongside a life that was already becoming harder to manage, mentally, emotionally, and physically.
It must have a purpose. Or our universe has no meaning, and that is unthinkable. But what purpose? That is humanity's great problem, to which reason so far has no answer.
A different actor might have drawn the line, kept Holmes precise, controlled, and slightly distant. Brett didn't. He closed that gap completely. He built the character from the inside and then stayed there. And that's why his Holmes still stands apart. Not because it's the most technically perfect, but because it doesn't feel like technique. It feels like pressure, it feels like something being held together in real time. And maybe that's the real answer. Jeremy Brett didn't just play Sherlock Holmes, he fixed the character, and in the end had nowhere to hide from him.
We are very grateful to you, sir.
My privilege, Miss Savage.